Okay, we're going to pick up where we left off with categorical logic or syllogistic logic, and we're going to start looking at the problems I left for you last video, and we're going to go on to direct inferences and the square of opposition. So just to remind ourselves, what we're working with is this very restrictive form of English expression where you're allowed only the verb of existence. You're allowed to say all, some, or none. And you have to have every statement must be a description of set membership, where the subject class, that's the first one, is or is not a member of the predicate class. So this is not going to make a lot of poetry. This is not going to be eloquent and flowery language in which you can hide a lot of fallacies and innuendo. This is going to be very rigid, and if you're going to say it, it's going to be right out in the open. And that's kind of the goal. So we had a few of these problems. I think of these as translation problems. We're still using English words, but we're translating from our ordinary, more loose language use that we would hear out on the street to the very strict language use within the logical system designed by Aristotle and his buddies. So let's get right into it. So the first statement, everyone thinks you should study more. So we got to find a couple things here. We need to think about how many are we talking about, what's the subject, and what's the predicate, and is it positive or negative? Those four things. So I think this statement is about, and that's how you find the subject. It's about everyone. So now, how would we translate that into all, some, or none? Well, everyone is all, right? So this would be all people are people who think you should study more. Next one. Alligators are dangerous. Well, how many? I think the subject is obvious. This statement is obviously about the alligators. How many alligators are we talking about? The statement doesn't say, right? There is no indication of number here. Typically, if that's the case, think of it as unrestricted, and it's typically all. So this would be all alligators are dangerous. Don't play with electricity. Okay, so right away we see, okay, there's a negative, and in English, we often hide our negatives with contractions. We got to watch for those. Okay, so that should be do not play with electricity. Now, who shouldn't play with electricity? Those statements could kind of go either way. It could be you should not play with electricity, or it could be everyone should not play with electricity. So I'm going to go with the larger set. So no people are people who should play with electricity. If you wanted to translate this as you should not play with electricity, that would become a direct reference problem, because it's like all people that are you are people that should not play with electricity. So I think when in doubt, go with the easier one. Here's a few more. Many philosophers are taxi drivers. How many philosophers are we talking about? Well, many is not necessarily all, but it's more than zero, so that must be some. So some philosophers are taxi drivers. A few philosophers are beekeepers. Notice that there's lots of philosophers that are taxi drivers, not very many philosophers that are beekeepers, but actually, because we only have one descriptor, for the number that's anything between 0 and all. So we're actually going to use some just the same way, okay? So even though this is, I think, relatively a large set, and this is relatively a small set, we would still say that we describe it with some philosophers just the same way. So some philosophers, that's the subject, are modifier, the predicate, beekeepers. The next statement, bees don't sting themselves. There's another negative, that's a contraction. So what's this statement about? Well, I think it's about bees. How many bees? This is another one where, well, there's no restriction on the number. So we're probably talking about all bees. So it would be bees don't sting themselves. We're talking about every bee, so it would be no bees are self-stingers or stinging themselves or something like that. Self-stingers is how I've written it up. Not every dog chases its tail. Now, not every, there is another weird number, right? So not all. Do we think that's none or some? So I think a reasonable interpretation here. Remember, we're going to keep that principle of charity in hand. If you said no dog chases their tails, then I think you'd introduce an obvious falsehood. So try to avoid that. So some dogs are not tail chasers, right? Because this is consistent with there's only one dog that doesn't chase its tail. Not every. All you need for that to be true is one non-chasing, tail-chasing dog. So some dogs are not tail chasers. Notice when it starts with some, the not goes in the middle. It would be really useful if in our language we had a word that was some and negative. Now that would probably be snot, and we probably don't want to use that. So we end up having it be some subject are not predicate with that not in the middle. Which a lot of that's one of the things that people tend to lose their grip on. The no is at the front, the not is in the middle of the statement, but it's still a logical operator there. It's still a logic word, not a meaning word, the way the tail chasers is. So watch for that. Okay, now some tough ones. So remember I warned you about this only. So our concept here is when you see only, stop. Then you think, I could probably go either way. The subject and the predicate could be reversed from their apparent order. I should think about it and decide which translation is most reasonable. Or you could go into a nice classic edition of Copy and memorize the, depending on the edition, between 3 and 9 pages he dedicates to trying to get, and every edition it got a little longer and a little longer and a little longer because there's so many exceptions to the rule. Stop, drop, and think. Okay? So, only a few students will get A plus. What do we think that's trying to say? That's trying to say there are some students that will get an A plus, but not many. So, is this about the students or is this about the A plus? And really, it's making it, really the only here is describing the number. And so I see this as basically saying some students will get an A plus. Okay? Only a few kind of comes as a set of words. And so really that's just saying there's a number of students that will get an A plus that isn't very big. And since we don't care about the size of numbers, we just translate that as some. Next one. Only staff can, I shouldn't have pressed that quite so quick. Only staff can use the staff men's washroom. Now, what do we think about that one? So the two terms are staff or people that are allowed to use the staff men's washroom. And there's no number given, so we think this is going to be an all or a none, right? So, because nearly always if it's going to be a sum, there's going to be some sort of indication of few, many, lots, hardly any. So if there's no description of the number involved, then you're probably looking for an all or a none. So is this, and I don't see a negative here anywhere, right? There's no negative words, no nones, noes, dots, right? Or nothing negative. So we're probably looking for an A form statement, and all subject are predicate. Now, is this all staff are people who can use the staff men's washroom, or, which is the way it is, that's kind of how it looks to start, or, because we're being careful about the only, all people who can use the staff men's washroom are staff. Well, which makes the most sense? Let's assume this is a normal workplace. There's no discrimination going on. There's staff that are not men. So is it true that all staff can use the staff men's washroom? No. But is it true that all people who can use the staff men's washroom are staff? Yes. Okay, so when you see that sign, well, the university is never going to be open again, apparently, but if you see staff only on that door out in the hallway, what does that mean? What is that only doing, right? If you're allowed to use the washroom, it's because you're staff. So all people who can use the staff men's washroom are staff. The platypus is the only mammal with a beak. Now, here we have only, but now it's in the middle of the sentence. So we know that that's going to have wrinkles of its own. Okay, so now is the subject things that are platypi or platypuses? I remember a few years ago, we had an Australian student in the class, gave me a lot of grief about how I pluralized platypus. The plural of platypus, according to him, was platypus. So is this all platypus are mammals with beaks? That's true, but it doesn't seem to capture the important part of the sentence. The important part is what's interesting about platypi is not that there are mammals with beaks, but that there are no other mammals with beaks. So how about all mammals with beaks are platypus? And I believe, at least on my take on this, that would be the correct translation. Okay, some direct reference translations. Here we have subjects being referred to by description. Tiger, you're such a crazy cat. Why don't you go over there? There you go. Okay. Yeah, you just watch and learn. Okay, there, pussycat. Okay. The Pope is in favor of peace on earth. Now we're talking about the person who's called the Pope. And that's a reference to a single person we call the Pope. Now, so we talked about direct references last time. And so we know that when we're talking about a direct reference, a name, that's a description. What we're really doing is saying all people who are the Pope are people who are in favor of peace on earth. And if you want to have, I mean, because there's been other popes, right? So you can have, and quite frankly, there's in other cultures, there's even other popes, but we assume that this is, if we were in the Ukraine, we would mean a different person by the same description. That's okay, it still works. All people who are the current pope are in favor of peace on earth. But just sit over there. Just sit. Okay. Queen Elizabeth II visited Winnipeg. So here we have a direct reference to someone who's actually got a number in her name, just for fun. So this is all people who are Queen Elizabeth II are people who visited Winnipeg. Then this last one, Justin Bieber's show sold out. So what are we referring to here? We're not actually referring to Justin Bieber. We're referring to the thing that is Justin Bieber's show. Remember back when there were shows? So this would be all things that are Justin Bieber's show are things that are sold out or just are sold out. So I've got as all shows that are Justin Bieber's. Oh, spell correct. Autocorrect caught me here. Sorry about that. Justin Bieber's are sold out. Okay, so that's those exercises. And just before we go on, let's talk about our forms a bit more here. I should do a dogs and cats example to see if we can hold Tiger's attention. We have all snakes are reptiles as the A form. Remember, this is subject and predicate. No snakes are reptiles, the E form. Some snakes are reptiles, and O form, some snakes are not reptiles. Now, just looking at this before we go on, we're going to talk about the concept of direct reference. This is the truth-falsity relationship between statements. But you can see, even just looking at these, if this one is true, don't we think pretty much automatically that this one has to be false? And if this one is true, wouldn't this one have to be true kind of automatically? And if this one is true, wouldn't this one have to be false somewhat automatically? And if you can see that, what you're seeing is what we call the direct inference relationship. If you have two statements with the same subject and predicate, but different form, different either quantity or quality. Remember, the quantity is the alls versus the sums. The quality is the positive versus the negatives, and positive versus negative. So if you can see that, then you're ready for the concept of direct inference. Direct inference is the relationship between any standard form statement and the other three possible statement forms when you have the same subject and predicate. And so this is not, and this is inferences, but this is not argument. This is kind of an automatic, okay? So, and these are useful to know because they kind of help you kind of keep track of things, right? If someone says, you know, all these ballots are false, you go, well, is that really, let's go back and say all ballots are false. Well, if I know that my ballot was turned in properly, so there's at least one ballot that's fair, or actually one ballot that's not false, then what's the truth of this one? I think that would have to be false. And so, to a certain extent, your your fact checking, your sort of intuition about the lay of the land, truth and falsity, can be sharpened by some appreciation of these direct inferences. So, and then just because it's university and we got to give everything big names, we have names for these relationships. And because it's university, you got to know them. And then I'm going to ask you about them. So, heads up. So, contradiction, which is a word that comes up in ordinary speech quite a bit. And we're actually going to learn contradiction twice. We're going to learn what it means now, and then we're going to learn what it means in syllogistic logic later. So, propositional or modern logic, it has a different meaning. So, heads up, and it really means the same thing logically, but the way you assess it is differently. So when we're assessing contradiction in syllogistic logic, we're talking about two statements that are contradictory when their truth values are always opposite. They can never both be true and they can never both be false. And then, since we have names for the statements, the contradiction of an A form statement is an O form, and the same in reverse. That's what vice versa means. And the contradiction of an E form statement is an I, and in reverse. So I think we have some examples cooked up here. Here's just summarizing all of that. A and O are contradictory to each other. So for any subject and predicate, all subject or predicate, the contradiction of that is some subjects are not predicates. And likewise for the E and the I. So when we look at some examples, no dogs are cute is contradicted by some dogs are cute. So the E is contradicted by the I. And if you think about it, if it's true that no dogs are cute, it would have to be the case that some dogs are cute is a false statement, right? If this says there isn't even a single dog that is cute, and this says there is at least one dog that is cute. So those two statements can never both be true at the same time, and they can never be false at the same time. All dogs are cute is contradicted by some dogs are not cute. So if it's true that all dogs are cute, then it must be false that some dogs are not cute. The next logical relationship is contrary. And this means something different than contradiction. And I know in ordinary language, contradiction, contrary tend to get all muddled up in each other. And we now need to be disciplined and realize that these mean different things. Subtly different, but nonetheless different. So two statements are contrary if they cannot both be true at the same time. That's the same as contradiction. But they can both be false at the same time. Okay? So the contrary of an A is an E. So all leopards are spotted. The contrary is no leopards are spotted. Notice that if all leopards are spotted is true, it must be false that no leopards are spotted. However, if it's the case that you find even one non-spotted leopard, that's not you, Tiger. I know you want to sit in my lap, but let's just do that later, okay? If you want to be a non-spotted leopard, then so you have some leopards are spotted and some leopards are not spotted. Then these can both be false, right? You get at least one non-spotted leopard. These are both false, but they cannot both be true. So let's just check on that. Two statements contrary if they cannot both be true. Yes, that's what we think with the leopard example. But they could both be false if we had one non-spotted leopard. So that's exactly what that is. So people confuse these all the time, and and it's often to their detriment. Um, Often people, when they get trapped into disagreeing, think if I want to say, all, you know, we get in a disagreement, say about police violence, and you take a position that you're not crazy about police violence, and we get trapped into a all cops are good versus all cops are bad, and we're essentially arguing about the contraries, all cops and no cops, right? All cops are good, no cops are good. That's a unnecessarily confrontational argument compared to talking about some cops, right? And that could be a large number or a small number. Given the evidence we have, at least one cop is not good. But to start talking about all versus none is ramping up the discussion in unnecessary ways. So it's very useful to not get trapped into uh, contrary type debates when a contradictory debate would be more useful. So, which, if you're trying to prove all rodents are vermin, uh, how much research would you want to do? And finding some that is not, right? And I think there's some species of rodents out there that are not vermin. Then that's finding at least one is way easier than finding none or all. You're kind of interfering with the works. Tiger, you're just going to have to go on the floor. Here you go. There you go. Ah! Okay, this is, I guess, the the comedy routine part of the show. Okay, so you can see that this is the contrary of that, and this is the contradiction. All I need to do to prove the contradiction is to find one. Well, that's way less work than trying to prove all. So that's why knowing the difference between contrary and contradiction is going to help. Next concept, subcontrary. So two statements are subcontraries if they cannot both be false, but can both be true. So if you're thinking, hey, isn't the exact opposite of the contrary? Bingo. Okay? So the subcontrary of an I is an O, and vice versa. Okay? So some students are honor roll students. The subcontrary of that is some students are not honor roll students. And you can see how these can both be true, but they cannot both be false as long as there's at least one student and there is an honor roll. Let's talk about this a bit more. People often get bogged down when we're in these statements of thinking, if we go back to the honor roll example for a moment, some students are honor roll students seems to imply that some are not, but doesn't have to. Okay, so if it's true that some students are probationary, now we're in trouble. It's possible but not certain that some students are not probationary, and the reverse. So our logic system on its own, and we work within, when we ordinarily speak, we work within a context in which we kind of know. I was talking about students within a university class. Yeah, they exist. There are contexts in which you do talk about things in which you hope that they don't exist, right? We want to talk about problems or talk about technical breakdowns in my video lecture. We can talk about that even though we really hope that number is zero. So we do talk about empty sets, things that don't exist, hopefully, as the color fades on me here. So as you're talking about these things, don't get bogged down in this, oh, that could possibly be true. Just go with what's given. So if it's false that some students are probationary, it would have to be possible and quite frankly certain that some students are not probationary as long as there is at least one student. Next relationship, alternation. So this is the relationship between universal and particular statements of the same quality. So the positive statements and the negative statements. The E's and the I's are the positives. The E's and the O's are the negatives. If a universal statement is true, the particular, that's the A and the E's, the particular statement, the I's and the O's, must also be true. So if it's true that all fish are slimy, it must be true that at least one fish is slimy, as long as there is a fish. The last one, thank goodness, subalternation. You probably saw that coming, right? We had contrary, subcontrary, we got alternation, subalternation. This is the logical relationship between the universal and the particular of the same quality, so that's the alternation part. But now it's sub because we're talking false. If the particular is false, the universal must also be false. So if it's false that at least one dog is not smart, then it must be false that no dogs are smart. And when you add up all of these relationships together, you get what traditionally is called the square of opposition, which is summarized in this diagram, kind of. I can't find a really beautiful one, and I lack the time or the ability to make one myself. I'll show you here is my version. It's a photograph I took after demonstrating this exact lecture to a class last term. So, and this is available on the Facebook page where the videos are posted. Just dig through the photos a little bit and you'll find it there. Notice that we have A and E, the universals across the top, the particulars across the bottom, positive, negative. And then I'm going to go with my diagram. I like that better. So, and I've even added the two circle diagrams here, although somehow I forgot that one. No student called me out for that at the time. I guess that you guys can do that. That would be the two circles. Boy, if I had a smart board, I could do it right now. But it would be two circles with the middle part scriggled out. So, we have the form name, an example of the form, all subject or predicate, the two circle diagram, and how that relates in various ways to the rest of the diagram. Okay, so the contradictions are across the diagonals, contraries across the top, subcontraries across the bottom, alternation going down, and subalternation going up on each side. And these squiggles over those letters are distributions. We're going to talk about those next time. So there's a little bit of a mystery there for you to get all worked up about. So we should probably think about doing some problems. So next time we're going to pick up here and say for these statements, all students are hardworking. We hope that's true. No faculty are present. What is the contradiction of? So some fiddlers are great, some violinists are not great. Can we give the contradiction, the contrary, and the subalternate of these? And the contradiction, contrary, and alternate of these. And you can do these plus any exercises in the chapter exercises sets for the sections D and F. And I'm sorry I don't know the page numbers. I still don't have a copy of the textbook. And that is it for direct inferences and the square of opposition. We'll pick up with those problems at the start of the next video. Have a good night, everyone.